The air in Mr. Henderson's office is thick enough to chew, stale with the scent of old paper and even older coffee. Mark, my husband, sits opposite the solicitor, a picture of smug entitlement. His new suit, a shade too shiny, stretches across his shoulders as he leans forward, eager. Beside him, a woman I've never met, but whose cheap perfume has already declared war on my sinuses, preens. Chloe, her name is. Mark mentioned her once, a work colleague. He's a terrible liar, but I was, it seems, a terribly good believer. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face seems permanently set in an expression of mild indigestion, clears his throat. So, Mr. Thorne, regarding the final transfer for the property at 17 Willow Creek Lane. Mark beams, reaching over to pat Chloe's hand. A small, possessive gesture. Yes, all ready. Just need to dot the I's and cross the T's, right? He winks at Chloe. I watch from the slightly ajar doorway, a ghost in my own life story.
My heart isn't hammering.
It's a cold, still stone in my chest. This isn't shock. This is the culmination of a plan. My plan. Henderson adjusts his glasses, peering at a document. Well, there appears to be a slight discrepancy, Mr. Thorne. Regarding the title. Mark's smile tightens a fraction. Discrepancy? What sort? Just some paperwork hiccup, I imagine. We're eager to get the keys. Chloe giggles, a high, tinkling sound that grates like nails on a chalkboard. Indeed, Henderson says, his voice dry as dust. The hiccup is that the title for 17 Willow Creek Lane was finalized and registered 3 days ago. Mark blinks. Finalized? Excellent. So, it's ours. Not quite, Mr. Thorne. Henderson looks up, his gaze flicking momentarily towards the doorway where I stand, unseen by them. The property was purchased outright. No mortgage. And the title is already registered. It's in the name of a Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. Silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it. Mark's face, just moments ago alight with triumph, slowly drains of color. His jaw slackens. He looks like a fish gasping for air on a pier. Chloe, sensing the shift, stops preening and looks at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. Eleanor. Mark whispers, the name alien on his tongue. He swivels his head, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, searching the room as if expecting me to materialize from the wallpaper. My wife. Henderson nods, his expression unreadable. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Your wife. It seems she purchased the property. Cash transaction. Quite decisive. Mark's mouth opens and closes. No sound comes out. He just freezes. The smugness, the confidence, the sheer audacity, all of it shatters, leaving behind a hollow-eyed bewilderment. He looks from Henderson to Chloe, then back to Henderson, a puppet whose strings have just been brutally cut. The gun he thought he was pointing at my future, my security, my inheritance, well, it seems he pointed it squarely at his own smug face. And I, Eleanor Thorne, just pulled the trigger. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. The world feels different when you're standing on the other side of a fire you didn't start, but certainly finished. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me share these stories, more than you know. Our life, before the rot set in, was ordinary. Beautifully, blessedly ordinary. Mark and I met in college. He was charming, ambitious, full of grand pronouncements about the future. I was quieter, more practical, but I loved his fire. We built a life, brick by ordinary brick. A small apartment, mismatched furniture, dreams whispered in the dark. We weren't rich, but we had enough. We had each other, or so I believed. My grandmother, Nana B, was my rock. She was a force of nature, a woman who'd weathered storms I couldn't imagine and always came out smelling of lavender and resilience. When she passed, the grief was a chasm. But she left me her legacy, not just a spirit, but a tangible one. An inheritance. Not a king's ransom, but enough to change our lives. Enough for a down payment on a real house, a garden for the dog we'd always talked about, a little security. We talked about it for hours, Mark and I, Spreadsheets, brochures, late-night Zillow binges. Our future, Ellie, he'd say, his eyes shining. This is it. Our forever home. He traced the lines on my palm, talking about patios and barbecues, a nursery even. He knew how to paint a pretty picture.
I see that now.
He was an artist of deceit. The money sat in a joint account, a symbol of our shared future. My trust, whole and unwavering, sat right there beside it. What a fool I was. A trusting, loving fool. The first hint of winter in our marriage wasn't a blizzard, but a subtle chill. Mark started working late more often. Big project, he'd say, vague and distracted. His phone, once casually left on the coffee table, became an extension of his hand, always screened down, always guarded. There were hushed calls he'd take in the other room, his voice a low murmur I couldn't quite decipher. When I'd ask, he'd brush it off. Work stress, babe. You know how it is, I didn't know stress. I didn't know this cold, slippery eel of evasion. He became glossier. New shirts, a sudden interest in the gym, a cologne I didn't recognize. Little things, like hairline cracks in a precious vase. You try to ignore them, tell yourself it's just the light, until one day you touch it and the whole thing crumbles in your hands. The inheritance. Nana Bea's gift. It was meant to be a foundation, a launching pad for us. I'd check the account balance sometimes, not out of suspicion, just anticipation. Picturing the little house with the blue door we'd bookmarked. Then one Tuesday, a day like any other, I logged in. The number wasn't right. It was significantly smaller. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. A typo, I told myself. A bank error. Surely. Mark was at a conference that week. In another city.
Or so he said.
The inciting incident wasn't a single gunshot, but a slow, dawning horror. I called the bank. No error, Mrs. Thorne. A polite, detached voice informed me. There was a large withdrawal. A wire transfer initiated 3 days ago. My blood ran cold. To whom? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The bank couldn't tell me without Mark's authorization. He was the primary account holder on that particular joint savings, a detail he'd insisted on, saying it was simpler for his business dealings, simpler for theft, it turned out. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried calling Mark. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. His generic, cheerful message a cruel mockery. Leave a message, I'll get right back to you. The silence on the other end was a roaring abyss. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. This wasn't just money. This was Nana Ba's legacy. This was our future.
Stolen.
By the man I loved. By the man I trusted with every fiber of my being. The cracks in the vase weren't hairline anymore. They were gaping wounds, and the pieces of my life were scattered at my feet. The pretty picture Mark had painted? It was burning, and the smoke smelled of betrayal. The days that followed are a blur of frantic calls, unanswered texts, and a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in my bones. Mark finally surfaced, full of breezy excuses about poor reception at the conference venue. When I confronted him about the missing money, his face adopted an expression of such profound, wounded innocence, I almost doubted my own sanity. A withdrawal? Ellie, what are you talking about? It must be a mistake. He promised to look into it, to call the bank, to sort it all out. He was so convincing, so concerned. For a fleeting moment, a tiny, desperate seed of hope sprouted. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the seed withered quickly. He never called the bank, not when I was around anyway. He'd make a show of frowning at his laptop, muttering about online banking glitches, but nothing ever came of it. His evasions became more elaborate, his patience with my questions thinner. The gaslighting was an art form. Ellie, you're becoming obsessed. You're stressed. Maybe you should talk to someone. Me. I was the problem. Not the gaping hole in our savings account where Nana Ba's legacy used to be. Not his increasingly furtive behavior. I started sleeping in the guest room. The silence in our apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every touch, Every promise, searching for the moment the script had changed, the moment he'd stopped being my Mark and become this stranger, this thief.
Food tasted like ash.
Sleep was a battlefield of nightmares from which I'd wake up exhausted, the pillow damp with tears I didn't remember shedding. I felt so utterly alone. Who could I tell? Our friends? They all loved Mark, the charming, funny Mark. They'd think I was hysterical, paranoid. My family? The shame was too great. Nana B had trusted me with her gift, and I had let this happen. I had let him. The weight of it was crushing. I tried to be normal. I went to work, smiled at colleagues, made small talk. But inside, I was a hollow shell, echoing with the enormity of his betrayal. He was poisoning the well of our life, and I was drinking deeply from it, unable to stop. The early struggles were a descent into a private hell. I was adrift, rudderless in a sea of my own bewilderment and pain. I found myself doing things I never thought I would. Checking his phone when he was in the shower, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type in the passcode I'd seen him use 100 times. Sifting through his credit card statements online, looking for clues, for anything that would make sense of the senseless. Each discovery was another small, sharp stab to the heart. Dinners I wasn't invited to. Hotel stays in our own city. Gifts I never received. The rising challenges weren't just emotional, they were logistical, insidious. Mark became a master of deflection. Every question about the money was met with a counteraccusation or a sigh of exasperation. Ellie, we've been over this. I'm handling it. He was handling me, managing my grief, trying to wear me down until I just gave up. He'd leave printouts on the kitchen counter, highlighted sections of financial jargon, things about market fluctuations and investment consolidations that made no sense, designed purely to confuse and overwhelm me. He was building a fortress of lies, brick by obfuscating brick. I started to withdraw, to retreat into myself. The world outside felt too bright, too loud, too normal. How could everyone else just go about their lives when mine had shattered so completely? My work suffered. My focus was shot. I'd stare at my computer screen, words blurring, the faces of my colleagues morphing into Mark's duplicitous smile. I lost weight. Dark circles bloomed under my eyes. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the haunted woman staring back. This wasn't me. This was a victim. And I hated her. Then came the whispers. A mutual friend, hesitant, concerned. Ellie, are you and Mark okay? I saw him the other day downtown with, well, it didn't look like a business meeting. The description of the woman, blonde, stylish, laughing a little too loudly, matched a name I'd seen on a recurring restaurant charge on his secret credit card statement.
Chloe.
The work colleague, the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. It wasn't just the money. It was everything. Our marriage, our history, my trust, all sacrificed on the altar of his selfishness and some cheap perfume. The anger, a cold, slow burn until then, finally ignited. It wasn't a wildfire, not yet. It was a single, focused flame, hardening my resolve. He wouldn't just get away with this. He wouldn't. The confirmation of the affair, while devastating, was also strangely clarifying. The fog of confusion and self-doubt began to lift, replaced by a chilling certainty. He wasn't just a careless husband who'd made a financial blunder. He was a calculating cheat, a methodical liar. The missing inheritance wasn't a mistake. It was funding for his new life. My Nana Bea's gift, intended for our family's security, was being siphoned off to build a love nest with his mistress. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath, then filled my lungs with icy resolve. This was the midpoint shift. The moment the tears stopped and the thinking began. I looked at that haunted woman in the mirror again, and instead of despair, I felt a flicker of something else. Defiance. He thought I was weak, emotional, easily dismissed. He thought he could break me and walk away whistling, pockets full of my future. He was wrong. The grief was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but now it was accompanied by a cold, sharp anger that was surprisingly energizing. I wouldn't just survive this. I would fight. Not with hysterics or pleas, not anymore. He'd shown me his weapons: deceit, manipulation, theft. I would choose mine: intelligence, strategy, and the undeniable power of the truth, wielded like a surgeon's scalpel. My first step was to stop talking to him about it. No more questions, no more confrontations. Let him think his gaslighting had worked. Let him think I'd retreated into a passive sorrow. I became an observer in my own home, watching him, studying his routines, his carelessness born of arrogance. He underestimated me. That would be his downfall. I started gathering evidence, meticulously, quietly. Copies of bank statements, screenshots of suspicious transactions, timelines of his absences. Each piece of paper was a small, cold comfort, a testament to his betrayal, but also a building block for my counteroffensive. I learned to school my features into a mask of weary resignation whenever he was around. Inside, my mind was a whirlwind of calculations and plans. I researched. Hours spent online, not on Zillow anymore, but on legal forums, property databases, articles about financial fraud and marital assets. The language was dense, intimidating, but I devoured it. Nana B. didn't raise a quitter. She'd faced down her own demons, built her own life from scratch more than once. Her strength flowed into me, a quiet current of determination. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my power, my name. He wanted to erase me from our shared future? I'd make damn sure he remembered Eleanor Thorne. The deepening crisis wasn't a sudden collapse, but a tightening vice. Living a double life was exhausting. Outwardly, I was the subdued, perhaps slightly depressed wife he expected. Inwardly, I was a detective, a strategist, a woman on a mission. The apartment, once a haven, felt like a cage, shared with my jailer. Every shared meal was a charade, every polite exchange a lie. His casual touches, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. I'd flinch internally, but force a wan smile. The effort was immense. He was getting bolder, more reckless. He'd leave his laptop open, texts from Chloe B. flashing on the screen. He'd hum happily while getting ready for late meetings, dousing himself in that cloying cologne. He clearly thought I was too broken to notice, or too defeated to care. He was practically flaunting it, and the money, more of it was disappearing. Smaller amounts now, trying to be less obvious, but the drain was steady. I tracked it all, a silent, meticulous accountant of his sins. One evening, I found a printout carelessly left in the recycling bin. It was a property listing. 17, Willow Creek Lane. A charming little cottage, recently renovated, with a newly landscaped garden. My heart seized. This was it. This was where my inheritance was going. This was the house he was buying for her with my grandmother's money. The rage that filled me was so pure, so potent, it almost choked me. I had to physically restrain myself from screaming, from tearing the house apart. Instead, I carefully smoothed out the crumpled paper, photographed it, and filed it away with the rest of my growing dossier. The fear was constant. Fear of him discovering my investigation. Fear of him clearing out the accounts completely before I could act. Fear that my plan, still nebulous and terrifying, wouldn't work. I felt utterly alone. I couldn't confide in anyone. The stakes were too high. One wrong word, one misplaced suspicion on his part, and he could spook, cover his tracks more thoroughly, disappear with everything. I started having trouble sleeping again, but this time it wasn't from sorrow, but from a wired, anxious energy. My mind raced, going over details, contingencies, escape routes. I knew I needed professional help, but I was scared. Lawyers cost money, money I was trying to protect. What if I picked the wrong one? What if they alerted Mark? The isolation was the hardest part. Carrying this immense secret, this burning anger and a desperate, flickering hope, all by myself. There were days I wanted to give up, to just scream and cry and let the chips fall where they may. But then I'd think of Nana B., her strength, her resilience. I'd think of Mark's smug, confident face, so sure of his victory. and the cold resolve would solidify again. He wasn't going to win. Not if I had anything to say about it. And I was starting to find my voice, even if it was only in the silent, furious planning happening inside my head. The turning point came on a gray Tuesday morning. I was staring at the listing for 17 Willow Creek Lane, the image burning into my retinas. He'd been unusually cheerful the past few days, a spring in his step, humming to himself. He was close. I could feel it. He was about to make his move, to secure his love nest. Time was running out. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was rising above it, a desperate, almost reckless courage. If I didn't act now, I'd lose everything. I remembered an old friend of Nana Bea's, a retired solicitor named Arthur Jenkins. He was ancient, sharp as a tack, and owed Nana a favor from decades ago, something she'd only hinted at with a wry smile. Finding him was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had that felt safe. I found his number in Nana Bea's old address book, the paper brittle with age. My hand trembled as I dialed. Arthur listened. He listened for over an hour, his occasional grunts the only interruption as I poured out the whole sordid story, the inheritance, the betrayal, Mark's affair, the house at Willow Creek. When I finished, my voice raw, there was a long silence on the other end. I thought he was going to tell me it was hopeless, that I'd left it too late. Instead, he said, his voice raspy but firm, "Your Nana B was a good woman, Eleanor. A damn good woman. This pig your husband has become, he won't get away with it. Not on my watch." Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through my despair. Arthur, bless his ancient, loyal heart, knew the law inside and out. He also knew people. He explained a strategy. Risky, complicated, but brilliant. It hinged on Mark's arrogance, his belief that I was a non-entity, already defeated. It involved moving faster than him, anticipating his next step. He was planning to buy the house, likely putting down a substantial deposit from my inheritance, perhaps even trying for a cash purchase if he could liquidate enough quickly. He'll be using a specific realtor, a particular closing attorney, the ones listed on that sheet you found, Arthur mused. He'll think he's being clever, keeping it all neat. We'll be neater. The plan was audacious. We would approach the seller of 17 Willow Creek Lane directly, or rather, Arthur would, through a discreet intermediary. We would make a cash offer, slightly above what Mark was likely negotiating, using the remaining portion of my inheritance that I'd managed to squirrel away into a new, separate account, plus a bridging loan Arthur somehow knew how to secure almost instantly against some of Nana Ba's other, smaller, less liquid assets I hadn't even known how to touch. The key was speed and secrecy. We had to close the sale, get my name on that title, before Mark even made his official offer. It was a whirlwind. Days blurred into a series of clandestine meetings with Arthur, hushed phone calls, signing documents in dimly lit coffee shops, my heart pounding like a drum. I had to wire the funds, every penny Nana B had left me, plus the terrifying loan, into an escrow account, trusting Arthur, trusting this insane plan. Every step was a gamble. If Mark got wind of it, if he closed his deal first, I'd have lost everything and be in even greater debt. I lived on adrenaline and black coffee, the mask of the subdued wife firmly in place at home, while outside, I was moving mountains, or at least trying to buy one small cottage out from under my thieving husband. The final papers were signed late on a Friday afternoon. Arthur called me. "It's done, Eleanor. 17 Willow Creek Lane is yours. The title will be registered by Monday morning, Tuesday at the latest." I sank into a chair, relief and terror warring within me. Now, all I had to do was wait for Mark to walk into the trap. The days leading up to Mark's appointment with Mr. Henderson were the longest of my life. I watched him, a hawk circling its prey, though in this scenario, the prey was about to get a very nasty surprise. He was almost giddy, whistling, making plans on the phone with Chloe in hushed, excited tones. He mentioned finalizing things at the solicitor's on Wednesday. My heart gave a little lurch. Wednesday. That was the day. Arthur had confirmed the title was officially, irrevocably in my name as of Monday afternoon. The trap was set. On Wednesday morning, Mark dressed with particular care. That new, shiny suit. Extra splash of the offensive cologne. He gave me a cursory peck on the cheek, a look in his eyes that I now recognized as pity mixed with triumph. "Big day at work, Ellie," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Don't wait up." Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, I thought. I wouldn't dream of missing the fallout. I drove to Henderson's office building an hour before Mark's scheduled appointment. I didn't go in. I parked across the street, in a spot with a clear view of the entrance. My hands were clammy, my stomach a knot of anxiety and a strange, fierce anticipation. This was it. The culmination of weeks of secret planning, of fear and fury, and a desperate hope for justice. I saw Chloe arrive first, teetering on heels that were too high, her blonde hair bouncing. She looked expectant, smug. A few minutes later, Mark's car pulled up. He practically swaggered into the building, Chloe on his arm. The picture of a man who thought he had the world on a string. My string. My world. The wait was agony. Every minute stretched into an eternity. I imagined the scene inside Henderson's office. The polite greetings. The paperwork laid out. Mark's confident pronouncements. And then the reveal. I replayed Arthur's words in my head. The property was purchased outright in the name of a Mrs. Eleanor Thorne. I pictured Mark's face. The shock. The disbelief. The dawning horror. A small, grim smile touched my lips. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the satisfaction of a carefully laid plan clicking into place. That's when I decided to move. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to be closer. I got out of the car, my legs feeling strangely unsteady. I walked towards the building, my steps measured, deliberate. I slipped into the lobby, then up the stairs to Henderson's floor. The corridor was quiet, hushed. I could hear the low murmur of voices from behind Henderson's closed door. I crept closer, my heart pounding, until I was right outside, listening. Listening to my husband's world crumble. And then I heard it. Henderson's dry, precise voice delivering the news. Mark, stunned, whispered, "Eleanor? My wife." The sheer, unadulterated shock in his voice was a symphony to my wounded soul. I leaned against the cool wall, a wave of dizziness washing over me, quickly followed by a surge of cold, hard strength. He was frozen. I could picture it. The arrogant smirk wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mask of utter devastation. Chloe, beside him, probably looking from him to the lawyer, her own dreams of a cozy love nest financed by my inheritance evaporating before her eyes. The silence from the office stretched. Then a muffled thud, as if something or someone had dropped heavily into a chair. I could almost hear the gears in Mark's mind grinding, trying to process the impossible.
How? When?
He would be replaying everything, searching for clues he'd missed, for the moment his brilliant plan had gone so spectacularly wrong. He'd never suspect me. Not quiet, mousy Ellie. Not the wife he'd so carelessly betrayed and underestimated. That was the core of the plot twist, the beauty of Arthur's strategy. It wasn't just about getting the house. It was about the utter, complete blindsiding. He thought he was the puppet master, pulling my strings, pulling the strings of the seller of the bank. But he was the puppet all along. I hadn't just reclaimed what was mine. I had used his own momentum, his own arrogance, against him. He was so focused on his deceit, he never saw me coming. He was trying to buy a house with money he'd stolen from me, for his mistress. And in his greedy haste, in his absolute conviction of my passivity, he'd walked right into a situation where the house was already mine. His down payment, if he'd already transferred it to the solicitor for his intended purchase, was now in limbo, a complex legal mess he'd have to untangle, likely losing a good chunk of it in fees or penalties. He hadn't just failed to get the house, he'd been outmaneuvered, outplayed, made to look like a fool. And I hadn't just gotten revenge. I'd secured my asset, my Nana BA's legacy, in the most deliciously ironic way possible. I pushed the door open, just a crack, enough to see. Mark was slumped in his chair, his face gray, his eyes wide and staring. Chloe looked furious, her perfectly made-up face contorted in an ugly sneer, directed not at Henderson, but at Mark. "You said this was sordid," she hissed, her voice sharp. "You said it was a sure thing." Mark didn't respond. He just stared, unseeing. Mr. Henderson, ever the professional, was shuffling papers, perhaps a little too intently. I let the door click softly shut. There was nothing more to see. The bomb had detonated. The shock waves were his to deal with. The aftermath was messy. Predictably, Mark stumbled out of Henderson's office looking like a man who'd seen a ghost, or perhaps had become one. Chloe stormed out moments later, a tornado of fury and cheap perfume, shooting him a look that could curdle milk before hailing a cab and disappearing, presumably, from his life as quickly as she'd entered it. Good riddance. Mark confronted me that evening, of course. He found me in the living room, calmly reading a book. The sight of my composure seemed to enrage him further. He was a wreck, his shiny suit rumpled, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild. "How could you, Ellie?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "How could you do this to me?" I looked up from my book, my expression carefully neutral. "Do what, Mark? Secure my own property with my own inheritance? The inheritance you were attempting to steal to house your mistress? I think the question is, how could you do that to me?" He deflated. The bluster, the anger, it all just leaked out of him, leaving behind a pathetic, defeated man. He tried to argue, to justify, to plead. He even cried. Crocodile tears, I suspected. It was too late for apologies, too late for remorse. The trust was not just broken, it was pulverized. The divorce was acrimonious, naturally. He fought, of course, tried to claim a stake in 17 Willow Creek Lane, but Arthur was a bulldog. My Nana BEA's inheritance, now securely invested in brick and mortar under my name alone, was protected. Mark's share of our joint assets was minimal, especially after his profligate spending on Chloe and his failed property venture. He ended up with very little, certainly not enough to maintain the lifestyle he'd become accustomed to. Last I heard, he was living in a tiny rental, struggling to make ends meet. Karma, as they say, can be a particularly vindictive landlady. As for 17 Willow Creek Lane, I never lived there. It was too tainted by his deceit, by the purpose for which he'd intended it. I sold it quite profitably, as it turned out, a few months later. The market was good. With the proceeds, and the rest of Nana BEA's wisely invested funds, I bought a small place of my own, in a different town, a fresh start. A little house with a yellow door, not blue. A garden for a rescue dog I named B, a scruffy terrier with an indomitable spirit. Rebuilding was slow. There were days when the grief would resurface, a dull ache for the man I thought Mark was, for the life I thought we'd have. But with each passing day, Eleanor Thorne, the strong, resilient woman Nana B always knew I could be, emerged more clearly. I learned to trust myself again, my instincts, my judgment. I learned that I was capable of far more than I ever imagined, not just of surviving betrayal, but of outsmarting it. There's a quiet strength in knowing you've faced the worst and come out the other side, not just intact, but stronger. The world doesn't look the same. It's sharper, clearer. The pretty pictures are gone, replaced by a reality that is sometimes harsh, but always, always real. And in that reality, I found a peace I hadn't known before. A peace born of self-reliance, of knowing I could weather any storm, because I already had. Nana B would have been proud. I think, finally, I'm proud of myself too. The stone in my chest isn't there anymore. In its place, something new is growing, something that feels a lot like hope, tended by my own hand. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. We all have our battles, our betrayals, the moments that try to define us. Sharing them, sometimes, is how we start to heal. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.